Hi, we're here today at Manchester Community College to introduce to you a video on wheelchair mobility. With me is Charlie Croteau, and Charlie is the author of a book on wheelchair mobility, as well as the co-producer of a video entitled Living with Spinal Cord Injury. Charlie has taught wheelchair mobility for the past 25 years at Boston Medical Center, as well as to physical and occupational therapy students throughout the New England area. We hope you find this video useful whether you are a client or a therapist teaching wheelchair mobility.
The three main reasons for wheelchair mobility are safety, efficiency, and good looks. And believe it or not, for most people, the latter, good looks, is the most important. In this tape, we're going to cover basically three sections. One for the paraplegic, one for the quadriplegic, and I hope most quadriplegics will watch the part on the paraplegic because there are a lot of techniques in there that they can pick up and work right into their own routines. And the last section of this tape will be on setting the wheelchair up properly, getting it dialed in so that it will be as efficient as possible for each user. And when you get to that part of it, if you're a patient, please have some consideration for your PT or OT who will be setting up the chair. The reason is there are so many combinations to be set up, different cushions to try, and I think if you can, try as many as you possibly can get your hands on and try them, that's fine. Don't worry too much about getting each chair set up perfectly, correctly. Really be concerned more with getting your own personal chair set up and finding out what works best for you. Let's begin by talking about wheeling. Wheeling is the foundation for everything else that will be covered in this video. So if you learn anything at all, learn how to wheel properly. If you have a good technique for wheeling, the other skills will fall right into place and you can build upon the skill. And you're going to see throughout this video that if you wheel right, your body will be in the proper positions for other elements of it as well. When you begin wheeling, everything begins with your head. So your head is the first thing to move forward. When your head begins to move forward, your whole body moves forward. And you can see by looking at my hands that when I move my head forward, I can greatly increase my stroke. So your stroke is greatly increased by moving your head forward, and that can result in at least a 30–40% gain in pushing. So the head is the first thing to move forward, and then generally you want to get your biceps into the act, which start back here and begin pulling up over the wheel. And once the chair is rolling, then the secret of wheeling is right here. You're going to use your triceps to straighten your arm out. You're going to be depressing with your shoulder, and you should be leaning forward at the same time. So all three of those elements occur simultaneously, and that's what really gives you your speed for moving forward. After this happens, we want you to just drop your hand to the back, and now you'll be sitting up again. So just start arching your back and sit up and let your hands fall to the back. And this will help keep the weight behind the back end. And you want to keep your weight on the rear wheel. Now the reason for keeping your weight on the back end of this chair is very simple. When you double the diameter of the tire, you have the rolling resistance. So you want the bigger wheels carrying most of the weight. The small wheel on the front of the chair. On this chair I have a 5-inch front wheel and a 24-inch back wheel. And this front wheel will go around 10 times as much as this back wheel will, roughly. So it's going to incur, if everything is perfect, the front bearing is going to have 10 times more friction in it than the back bearing just because it's spinning 10 times faster. And the other thing is any little nook and cranny, any little bump will slow that front wheel down more. That's why you hear when you compare rollerblades or a skateboard, all that noise you hear from a skateboard going down a hill is rolling resistance turned into sound energy. and that's lost energy. And a bicycle rolls over the same surface much easier because it has a much larger diameter tire. So you want the rear wheel to carry all the weight. So when you get done with that push, you want to arch your back and bring it back to the full sitting position and let your hands fall to the back. One of the most common mistakes in wheeling is for the patient to push forward and then simply pull your arms backwards and trying to bring them up over the wheel again. The problem with this is when you're pulling your arms backwards, you're actually pulling your body forward. And so you're taking the weight off the back of the chair, and now you're only getting half your stroke. And it's the most common mistake you'll see over and over again, people wheeling with what I call the Grandma Moses push. Just start out nice and easy. The one thing you don't want to see, and it's very diagnostic, is people that wheel like this. You'll see this in a lot of nursing homes. It's very inefficient. So make sure you get out of that habit and just get into rolling your hand around nice and easy. And stay back and let the chair carry your weight. Now that you've mastered wheeling, or at least have a good idea of it, let's pick up where we left off. When you finish your wheeling, you should be gliding and leaning back on the chair. This is taking the weight off the front end. When you come to cornering, you want your front end to be as light as possible. So already you can see where it's good to have good wheeling techniques in form. You'll be leaning back on the chair, making the front end light. And there are three basic principles in turning. There's the stopping and turning, there's the pushing to turn, and there's using the walls. So let's go out and take a look at this. The next thing I generally teach in wheelchair mobility is cornering. Now you have three main choices when you come to corners. The first is to come to the corner and slow the inside wheel down and make the corner. When you're talking about efficiency, it's perfectly all right to do that, but you're using your strength and you're losing your momentum by slowing down to make the corner. So you're paying twice for something that you've already put the energy into. So it's the least efficient way to corner. The second way to corner is to push on the outside wheel and make the same corner. When you're cornering this way, at least you're getting the energy you're putting into the wheelchair, and it's more efficient. The problem with this method of turning is if you're going at a fairly good clip, to come around the corner, now you have to really push like crazy to make it around the corner. And if you're inside a building, people frown on getting run over. So you have to use that where it's appropriate. The third method of cornering is to simply come to the corner. If you have something around you, lean back and touch the corner. So you can corner very easily and not lose your speed. What you're doing is, when you're done pushing, you should be on the back of the chair. And the reason for that is also you're taking the weight off the front end, making it lighter to turn side to side, and then you're putting your arm behind you to push back, or in front of you to make a left turn, but not alongside of you. Pushing alongside of you does nothing to the chair. So, just wheel along easy, reach back, and push, and you've got it. Now when you're doing this, keep your thumb up. And the reason I call this Charlie's rule of thumb is because once you come around this corner, you can take and push off of the next obstacle or the next corner that you're on. So keep your thumb up, and that way you can judge how easy it will be, or if it's best for you to take a push off that corner. If you don't have your thumb up and you have your thumb down, you're going to be in the wrong position to push off. So what we want you to do is be able to put all of these elements together as you teach or learn this skill. Wheel along, come around the corner, get in close, and push off. It's a little more efficient to push off of something that's stable than to trying to catch up with your wheel, which is already moving. You can get a better, faster push off. So it's a little more efficient. But those are the three big ways of cornering. One little trick, after you teach cornering and you're teaching them to keep their thumb up, you might want to teach them how to wheel along with just one hand. And the purpose of this exercise is basically if you're carrying a cup of hot coffee or you actually injure your arm, you can still wheel around with just one hand. And the way that it looks is you're going to push off of an object and then bring yourself back in. Out and then in. And push out and in. And basically, when you learn to wheel, you can wheel all over the place with just one arm. So you should be able to travel anywhere you need to go with one arm, just pushing yourself along and turning around. And so it's something you use mostly in the house when you're carrying a hot plate of food or carrying a hot drink or something like that. It's just a good little skill to learn. The way that it works is you're pushing off of the wall and turning yourself out, and then touching the wall and bringing yourself in. So you want to be going out and in, out and in. And you can go all over the place with this type of technique, out and in. And you can turn going around other corners. So learn how to wheel with one arm. That way, if you ever hurt your shoulder or you're carrying a cup of coffee, you'll be all set. Going down ramps is a very simple process for the paraplegic. Basically, we want you to keep your weight back so that when you're stopping, the chair does not pull you forward out of the chair. So basically, going down is just to keep your weight back. When you're going up ramps, the main thing to remember is try to keep your weight in front of the axle. So instead of using this long rotational stroke that you would use for wheeling, now I want you to go and use just a half a stroke, keeping everything in front of the axles. So that's the two main things, and let's just see how this looks in reality. When you come to going down ramps, one of the main things to remember is to keep your weight back. The reason for this is when you're stopping the wheelchair, you'll be holding your wheels with your hands, and that's going to be pulling you forward. So if you keep your weight forward, you end up pulling yourself forward, plus you're transitioning down. So when you come down a ramp, simply lean back, letting the hands slide, the hand rim slide between your hands. And if you want to go left, take a little left. Right, right. But pretty simple thing for most paraplegics. And keep your weight back when you get to the bottom of the ramps for transitions too. Going up ramps is basically a matter of keeping your weight in front of the axle. All right? You shouldn't be coming back here because you'll be pulling the front end up. Keep your weight in front of the axle, cut your stroke in half, and do that little half stroke that most people naturally gravitate to. And then you want to be throwing your weight forward first and using that snapping motion, which was at the end of your roll, to shoot your weight back up and then fall down again. So it should be almost like rowing a boat. You're on the ramp, you're pushing forward and letting your body fall down and get into a rhythm. And you should be pretty good. One little skill you'll want to learn is to go down ramps and wheelies. This is very easy. The same skills of pulling wheelies apply here. You're getting the weight behind your axle, picking the chair up, and then letting it roll down the hill. Simply let the handrim slide between your hands, and if you do start to fall over backwards, just stop the chair and the front end will come down. A very simple thing to learn, but very useful on rough terrain. Once you've mastered going down the smooth ramp in a wheelie, you might want to practice going across lawns and little downhill places like that where you'll have to push to keep yourself going. But it's still a very good skill. And as you get it down, you can move to steeper and steeper terrain, and eventually you'll be able to handle just about anything with it. Sometimes in life the world gets a little bit rougher. For this, you can sometimes just pull a wheelie and go down, keeping your wheelie, and you're pretty safe. If you need to stop, just pull backwards and you'll pull the front end down. But this is a very good way to be going down, rather than having your front end, the small wheels, hitting every nook and cranny and causing you problems. Going up this rougher terrain, if it gets too steep, pick a different angle. If you can't wheel up it this way, take a little traverse, come across it. Work your way up on the little flat spots, picking transition areas, keeping your weight forward, and then pushing. In this section on uneven surfaces, I want you to consider three main principles to keep in mind. One is that the lighter your front end is, the straighter the chair will go. Because the back wheels are parallel, if you took all of the weight off the front wheels, then the chair will do nothing but go straight and follow the pattern of the back wheels because they're fixed. The heavier the front end is, the more it will tend to follow the contour of the road. So if you want to follow the contour and make a turn, put more weight on the front end, the front wheels will drop that weight and follow the road more. The other thing is the amount of speed of which you traverse a slanted surface affects how much that surface has bearing on the chair. If you go across a slanted area in 1 second, you'll have 1 second of effect. If you go across that very slowly and take 10 seconds, you're going to have 10 seconds of gravitational effect pulling you off to one side. So the faster you go across a section, the less effect it will have on the wheelchair. When it comes to reading uneven surfaces, you have to make several decisions. Basically, how fast you want to go and where you want to go. The slower you move on an uneven surface, the more that surface will have an effect on your wheelchair. So if we go slow down this little hill, you can see that the low spot of the sewer is affecting the ball greatly. If you go a little bit faster with your wheelchair, you'll find out it still has an effect, but not as much. And if you want to follow the road, put more weight on the front end, and you'll begin to follow the road more. So if you don't want to follow the curve, put the weight on the back end. The basic thing to remember, if you want the chair to go straight, put the weight on the back end. The back wheels are parallel and fixed. They won't follow the road as much as the front wheels do. So if I came out of here and say I wanted to wheel over to the other building across the way, I would try to have a little bit of speed up and lean backwards. Now the hole is not affecting me as much. And you're making it up the hill. With even more speed, it's even better. And if you're coming across this way, just let the hill pull you along and only wheel with one arm. But try to keep yourself moving. The faster you're moving, the less effect the slanted sidewalk will have on your wheelchair. And keep your weight back. If you want to go straight on a slanted sidewalk like this, Lean way back, and the chair will basically go straight. When it comes time to wheeling on grass or soft surfaces such as sandy soils or anything with it's going to slow you down, carpeting, one of the big tricks is to keep your weight on the back of the chair. You want the front wheels to be light and not falling in every little nook and cranny as they go along. So the main thing is just keep your weight back and you'll be fine for wheeling around on soft surfaces. One little trick when it comes to slanted sidewalks is to put your uphill wheel on the grass if you can, and this will keep you going straight. Now I grant you this sidewalk is not very slanted, it just happens to be the best we could find here on this campus. But if you can keep your uphill wheel on the grass, it'll help you not have to fight the downhill pull of a slanted sidewalk all the time. When it comes time to making decisions about wheeling on uneven surfaces such as this street, you may want to think about trying to wheel on the crown of the road. If you stay here on the slanted surface, you can see that the chair is always going to be falling off to the left. And so you're going to have to fight that. And if you're going a long distance, it's going to add up. You may want to think about getting on the crown of the road, putting a wheel on each side of it, and then leaning back and letting the road actually help you. You'll go straight because one wheel is going to the right, one wheel is going to the left. So it can be very helpful if you're going for a long distance. When it comes time to going through doors, with pushing them open with your feet, first make sure the door is unlocked. A lot of people smash into doors, don't want you to break your toes, and make sure you have foot protection on. If you're in the hospital setting, don't do these things without having shoes on. When you come up to the door, I want you to come in at a bit of an angle and be as far out as possible to give you as much leverage on the door. I'm going to make sure it's open, and then go back to the wheels and stay on the wheels and just push the door. I'm pushing at a bit of an angle because the door is going to push me, my front end, at a bit of an angle, and I don't want to end up hung up on this other door jamb. So as you can see, the door is churning me, and just push through with your hand. When it comes to opening doors, you want to roll up, keep your chair at 90 degrees. Try not to get in a position like this, because when you're pulling on the door, your front end is going to try to go away from the direction you want to turn. So try to keep it at 90 degrees or less. Leave enough room for the door to clear your chair, and lean forward. And you're bracing yourself with your other arm so you don't pull yourself out of the chair. And here, if you're a paraplegic, you have two choices. One, you can throw the door away and roll through, or you can hold on to the door and pull yourself through. And that's the standard way for opening doors for a paraplegic. In this section of the video, we're going to talk about wheelies. Wheelies are important for a variety of reasons, and you'll find a number of great applications for them throughout your daily routine. A few words of caution first. One is always start out with a spotter. And two, if you do fall over, which you will do eventually, everybody does, making a mistake. When you do fall over, tuck your chin into your chest so that you won't hit the back of your head on whatever surface it is that you're wheeling on. If you're a teacher of wheelies, one very important thing to remember is never let your patients back up and pull their wheelies. It seems like a very easy thing to do is to back up and stop the chair and pull a wheelie. But if you let them learn this way, they'll have a very bad habit of, when they come to jumping over a curb on the run, of pulling backwards. And of course you can't do that, as you'll see in this video coming up. So never let the patient back up. Doing wheelies is just a very simple matter of transferring weight behind the axle to change the balancing point of the chair and pushing the chair out from underneath you. So it's just that simple, and let's go out and take a look at it in the real world. One thing I want you to keep in mind when using your wheelchair is the weight distribution. When it comes time for wheelies or wheeling straight on uneven surfaces, or even just letting the weight of the wheelchair carry your weight after every push, keep in mind where your body is. On this wheelchair right now, my front end has about 25 pounds of pressure on the front wheels. And that's just a rough measurement. But if I take my head and move it behind the axle, and let's just say my head weighs 10 pounds, I'm taking 10 pounds from here of that 25 pounds of weight and moving it behind the axle. But now that 10 pounds is really lifting up 10 pounds of weight on the front end. So really now my front end only weighs 5 pounds. So you can see it becomes very easy to change the whole dynamic of this wheelchair from stable to a very light front end. So I want you to keep in mind the factor of working. 10 pounds up here is equal to 20 pounds of lift. You're taking the 10 off, and that 10 is now lifting the front end up. So it makes it very easy to distribute your weight. And most of this game is a game of weight distribution. Jumping up and down curbs is just shifting your weight back and putting it forward. Getting large movements for larger curbs and smaller movements for smaller curbs. When you're teaching wheelies, if you have a patient or if you're a student of wheelies and you're learning this stuff, if you get into this herky-jerky type of motion, generally it's because you're taking your hands off of the chair, and as soon as you do that, you lose control. So what you need to learn is just sliding your hands on the hand rims, and when you do that, you can be in control of the chair all of the time. You're never out of control. Another important thing, if you do fall over backwards, please tuck your chin into your chest. We don't want you to hit your back of your head on the floor or whatever you're practicing on. And if you do start falling backwards, to save yourself, pull backwards. That will bring the chair down. It sounds wrong, but pulling backwards is the right way to save yourself. And this will be very helpful when you're wheeling down ramps or over rough terrain, which you'll see in the future. Obviously, if you're just learning to do wheelies, you want to have a spotter behind you. Safety first, or as I say, when in doubt, chicken out. So with the spotter behind you, you'll have somebody that can catch you if you fall over, okay? A very nice thing to have. And if you're a teacher of this and you're going to be doing this for half an hour or so, could you grab that bench, Meg? One way to spot is to have a bench with little wheels behind you so that you can practice wheeling and stay right behind. A lot of today's chairs don't have the canes on the back. They simply have a metal bar across down here. So you'll end up with a sore back if you're a therapist trying to spot somebody for a half an hour. So this is a real back saver, little trick, and you can throw in your toolbox for the future. And the next thing you want to teach after you teach the wheelies is wheeling along and jumping over cracks in the sidewalk just to get the timing down of when to pull a wheelie. And generally what I teach is when you can see the crack between your toes, then reach way back, I call this a giant stride, putting all the weight behind the axle and then lifting the wheels up and going over the curb. So it should look, your weight is back and you're picking the chair up and going over the curb. So you can be moving along, boom, boom. Okay, once you teach that many times, then they'll get their timing down, and the next thing they can go on to is jumping over a curb. In this section, we're going to cover jumping up and down curbs. And we're going to cover two different methods. One is the one-step or the continuous method of moving along and jumping over the curb without stopping. This is used mostly by paraplegics. And the second method, we'll just call it the two-step method, where you pull up to the curb, pull a wheelie, stop, back up, and then continue forward, getting your momentum up again and going over the curb. And this method is used basically by quadriplegics who are just starting out or using projections. So now that you've practiced jumping over the cracks in the sidewalk or lines in the linoleum, whatever it happens to be, the next step is to jump up the curb. And for that, you better roll up slowly. You see the curb between your toes. You can see my front end is only a few inches away from the curb. You're reaching way back to this giant stride, picking the chair up, and you want to land those wheels on top of the sidewalk before your back wheel hits. So you have a very small window of opportunity of about 8 inches before that wheel contacts the thing. And now, notice where my hands are. They're in front of the axles, ready to drive all that weight forward and up over the hill. So let's look at it and put it all together in one smooth little thing. You don't need a lot of speed here. Most of it's just timing, and you're on top of the curb. The first method of getting off curbs that I teach is going down backwards. You basically pull up parallel to the back end with both wheels are going to fall off at the same time. The only mortal sin is stopping. Do not stop, just fall backwards and let the chair roll backwards. All right? If you need to stop, if you're coming off and you do need to stop, just stop one wheel and let the chair turn around. If you stop both wheels while you're in a wheelie, you're most likely to fall over backwards. So just stop one wheel at a time if you do have to stop. But otherwise, just let the chair roll off backwards and you'll be fine, keeping your weight to the forward end of the chair. So let's look at jumping up again. You want to be able to roll up right about here, leaning back, putting your weight back, and then pulling it over and finishing the job. And then falling off backwards. So it should be a very easy, natural thing. Coming up to the curb. Right? One thing, as a therapist, if you're trying to diagnose what's going on, one thing that's very diagnostic, if you hit the wheels, your back wheels, on the curb before your front end. And watch my feet. You'll see that they fly forward when I do this jump. And that, when you see the feet going forward like that, it's very diagnostic of your back wheels hitting before the front wheels are down on the curb, and that slams your front end down and your feet go flying off. So that's one little thing to remember if you're watching, trying to figure out what's going on. Meg, could you come spot me? Stand. All right, and you'll put one hand in front and one behind. Okay. When you're teaching this, if you're spotting, you want to be able to stop. If somebody hits the curb and bends forward, if they have on a body brace, then it's going to really cut into them. So you as a therapist will be able to stop them from falling forward. Or if they fall backwards with too much wheelie, you can catch them. So those are the two things you'll be looking for when you're spotting. You ready? Yep. Oh. Nope, it's fine. So you can see the feet off there. All right, and there I just made it. So when you see the front end bounce up again, you know you don't have just enough wheelie. Okay. One of the ways of getting off of curbs, it's called going off a curb in a wheelie. But I don't want you up here in a wheelie balancing and then going off the curb. A very dangerous thing to do. The best way to teach this is to pull a very small wheelie. You're going to feel the chair on your back, knowing that you picked it up. But then don't pick it up very high. Now the reason for this is when you land on the ground, when you started, the bottom of your tire, which was here, has now been pushed 8 inches forward, in just this 2.5-inch drop. So it gives you quite a push behind you. And what you'll find is when you do that, the chair is pushed out from underneath you. So if you're balancing on a curb and then you jump off, you're going to find that whoa, it's pushing you forward quite a bit, and you have to save yourself from falling over backwards. A bigger curb will actually push you even more. So don't do that. You might fall over, break your neck on the curbstone, then you'll be in more trouble. So let's put all these elements together and see how simple it should look. Very safe, not a big deal. It's mostly timing. Another way to teach getting off of curbs besides going backwards and forwards is going off sideways. This is something you don't use very often, but sometimes you have a case of beer in your lap and you don't want to shake it all up. Or if you're out in the woods and going over tree roots where you can't go off evenly, you don't get to pick how you're going to go off it, and that's going off on an angle. And basically, you can put your front wheel off the curb, shifting your weight to the uphill side, and then letting your back wheel slide off the curb slowly. And then you come down off the curb. Curbs, it's one thing to jump over. The little wooden curb we demonstrated on. It's quite another thing, one that's in the real world and won't move. But not a big deal at all. Just pick your shot, do things right, and you should be all set. Keep your weight back on the softer surfaces. Coming up to it, keep yourself rolling. Not a problem. In this section of the video, we're going to cover techniques used by quadriplegics. Basically, most things are the same that the paraplegic would use, but if you are not able to use those techniques, in this section we'll cover other tricks that will be able to help you with other problems that you might encounter, such as backing up or getting on and off elevators, opening and closing doors, and different techniques. Wheeling with projection is an art in itself. Basically, you want to do about the same thing that you're doing with the other things, that is starting with your head first and pulling your body forward. Now, since your biceps and your shoulders are your strongest assets, you want to try a few different techniques. One is pulling yourself forward and trying to supinate your shoulder as it comes down so you can drive and lock your elbow and drive with your shoulder. Now, the other thing that you want to do is, in order to find where the projections are, once you get rolling, you want to be able to drop your finger, bump, bump, now plant. So you're trying to feel where the projection is going to come up. So you bump, you feel it bump, bump, and then plant. Bump, bump, and then plant. So it's a bit of an art to learn how to do this, but once you get it down, you'll be able to And you can see I haven't been doing this for years, but I wheeled with projections for 3 years after I got hurt, and they're very helpful. But it takes a little getting used to learn how to coordinate your hand. But once you get this down and feeling the projections come by your hand with the bumping, bump, then you'll know where to plant it. But beyond that, once you get that down, you can just forget about it. Your hands will automatically know where to go. Very frustrating to start, and all I can say is hang in there, and you'll get it eventually. When you have projections and you need to back up, backing up can be very frustrating. There are 2 things to do. One is to put your body forward and try to catch the projections with your wrist, and then throwing your weight. backwards and pulling backwards with your hands. So, not too easy to do. And the other way, just putting your body into it, is one way. Another way that I used to back up, especially off of elevators, was to back up this way, putting your hands behind you and straightening your shoulders out. Either way will work fine. Just find something that's comfortable for you. Certainly pulling backwards is a matter of getting your hands locked in there, or your wrist, and pulling backwards. And the other method, this can be especially good, especially if you're backing out of an elevator or something like that, where you need to be looking where you're going. Getting on elevators is always a questionable thing. Do you turn around before you get on or not? If you're having a hard time wheeling, I would just get on with your back to the elevator and worry about what comes, what may. Getting off the elevators, if you're having trouble backing up, you can sometimes pull yourself backwards out of the elevator, and that can save you some time and worry about everybody looking at you, and it's a tough time to operate. Another thing that you can do if you're not going to use lugs or projections is to use knobby tires with high friction plastic hand rims. I used the knobby tires for about 3 years, and after I got done with those, I used these high friction rims. The wheeling techniques are the same as a paraplegic, but the only difference is I use a tire to start with, to push my hands on the tire. So it gives you a little more leverage, it's higher, and this dimpled effect really gives you a lot of traction. The problem with trying to use hand rims is, even though they're a high friction, they're still rather slippery, and you need to develop your pectoralis muscles in your chest to be able to get enough inward force to generate that friction. Another little thing that you can do is simply wear a glove, and this is just a leather glove that I generally use. May not look too delicate, but I get a glove with a strap on it, and that keeps it on. So when you're stopping, this glove won't pull off your hand. So the wheeling techniques are the same as for the paraplegic, and you can substitute. Get yourself some leather gloves and knobby tires, and I think you'll find that these with a completely broken pattern on them are wonderful. So coming up, get your weight as far forward as you can, and your biceps are your best asset here, so really try to get them into it as much as possible. I'm trying not to use my triceps very much here, but my injury is a C6 injury, so take heart. Okay, and going down, we'll just, once you get your front wheels over the transition point of the ramp, now you can transition to your brakes. And left for left and right for right. But just let them slide between the two things. Lean back when you hit the bottom of the ramp too. For some of you, if you're having trouble going up ramps and maintaining your forward momentum, or if you're just trying to shift between the lugs, you can get a thing called a hill holder, which is simply a camming mechanism which mounts on the brake and rubs against the tire. And when you're going forward, it allows the tire to roll, but when you try to back up, it cams and locks itself against the wheel, stopping you from rolling backwards. So a very helpful little device, and I used them for 2 or 3 years at least after I got hurt. all the techniques for cornering are basically the same for the quadriplegic as for the paraplegic. If you are having trouble, if you don't have complete triceps and can't get your arm to extend behind you for cornering, then you can use your elbow. So just the same wheeling, put your elbow out, and it will help you spin around the corner. Just make sure the corner is not too rough and it doesn't abrade your elbow. Would be the only thing. But you can corner just by using your elbow and your shoulder. For some quadriplegics just starting out, wheeling can be quite a challenge. If that's the case and you're trying to practice cornering, the therapist can simply provide the power for the wheeling, and the patient can work on just the cornering techniques. Ooh, beauty. Okay. And you can do it left-handed, right-handed. It also makes for a good opportunity for the therapist to be able to let them see how it should feel. When it comes time to opening doors, I want you to come up to the door and make sure it's unlocked. A lot of people have damaged their toes simply by trying to bash into the door and not losing their momentum. And so make sure the door is unlocked. If you have to use the handle, get it unlocked and go back to the wheels. Try to stay with the wheels. If you start pushing on the door, you're going to find out that you're really pushing yourself backwards. Okay? Once you come up to the door, come at a bit of an angle because this door is going to be pushing your front end over to the left here, and I don't want you getting hung up on the door jamb of the other door. So a little bit of an angle, and try to stay out as far as possible to give yourself as much leverage as possible, and just keep pushing with the wheels. If you get in here and get stuck, you can use your elbow to keep the door off your wheels and come on through. When it comes time to opening doors, there are many ways to accomplish the task. One of the first ways, if you're a fairly high-level functioning quadriplegic, is to use the technique that the paraplegics would use, basically pulling the door open while you're facing it. Another way, which I had to use when I first began as a quadriplegic, is opening the door backwards. And this entails getting your hand into the loop here and turning and using the wall as the brake and pulling the door open and getting your hand out of the door and pushing it again. Now you can do several things here. One, if you have enough triceps, you can throw the door away and turn your front end into it and then roll on in. That's okay if you have triceps. If you don't have the triceps, then a technique you might want to use is to get the door open and turn your chair into the door enough to get your wheels on the door, and then push the door open. And once you get to about this point, you just want to try to turn yourself and roll backwards and push yourself through. Okay? Now, I should mention here that this door is extremely accessible. As you can see, this D handle is very open. Most doors are not this accessible. And so a lot of quadriplegics, when they reach back, the tenodesis closes their hand and they can't get it into a tighter loop. This door is fine, and at the college we couldn't find a better door. But if you are having trouble with that, you're going to want to come up to the door sideways. And what I usually do is roll up and leave about 18 inches. And the reason for this 18 inches is you want to have a radius to get in here. So if you put your hand in the door and then start turning backwards, you have a 24-inch wheel, so half of that diameter is 12. And you want to leave about 6 inches space between you and the door. So if you start at about 18 inches out, you're going to end up 6 inches away from the door. And this gives you enough room to clear the door, to clear your chair with the door rather, and be able to push it open. Okay? So there are a number of ways to do that. And sometimes the trickiest part is just getting your hand into the door. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind you need to get your hand out of here before you push the door open. So you don't want to open the door too much before you get the door jammed on your hand. Another method of teaching jumping up and down curbs, which I generally use for quadriplegics who don't have really great mobility yet or are using projections, is to teach them a two-step method, which is basically to pull up to the curb, then pull a wheelie and get their front end on the curb. Now here, you're going to back up, spin your front wheels around. It gives you more room, which will give you some running momentum before you hit this curb. And then you just simply need to either fall forward or put your weight forward before you push and have everything in front of the axle. So your hands are in front of the axles. Don't be back here because you'll be pulling the chair up when you go to pull. So pushing down, make your body go down first, and then when it stops moving, you push. So just, right, and pushing forward, and we're up. All right, so you pull up to the curb. When you get fairly close, you can see the curb through your toes. Your hands are back. You're pulling your little wheelie. Put your wheels on the curb. Now spin them around and back up. And this is going to give you some running room to get your momentum moving before you hit this curb. And then your hands are in front of the axles and you're pushing your weight forward and then down. So when I fall forward, then push. So as soon as your body stops moving, that's when you should be starting to push. And now you're on top of the curb. You can put your brakes on. You have to readjust your body. Not a problem. And that's a typical way of getting up and down curbs for a quadriplegic. And the same backing off. So let's look at that again. Pull up to the curb. Get your weight behind the axles. Pull that little wheelie. Place your front end on the curb. Back up as far as you can. Put your hands in front of the axles. Throw your weight forward and then push. Make sure you throw your weight forward before you begin the pushing because you'll pull a wheelie very easily while you're already in one. So just weight forward and then push. And you're up. What we're going to cover next is how to choose a chair, the basic fundamentals of seeing what fits right, and also how to set that piece of equipment up properly for the patient. Let's start with the width of the chair. Ideally, you want the chair to be as narrow as possible, not only for going through doorways and narrow spaces, but mostly so that the tires or the wheels where you're pushing fit underneath your armpits. And this will translate into a much better power transfer into the wheel. If you can get away with a 16-inch chair over an 18-inch chair, that alone is a 12.5% savings in energy put forth every time you're trying to push. So let's look at the wheels of a chair as far as width goes. There are several things you can do to correct width on the modern wheelchairs. So to determine how wide your wheelchair will be, simply measure your hips, and that will tell you if they're 18 inches, 16 inches, or whatever, and then go for a seat width that is close to this. And I say close to this because you don't have to be too fussy. Some of you may have some soft tissue on the side, and if you can hold that in just a little bit with side guards like this, you're going to be ahead of the game. So a rough estimate, though, is go by your hip bones and how much soft tissue you have as to how wide your seat should be. And then if you need to adjust the chair, you can simply do that by moving the axle mount, this large 1 1/8-inch bolt can be loosened up, and this axle sleeve can be threaded in or out to make the chair narrower or wider as you go. So you can fine-tune the width of your chair so that it's not rubbing on your sides. So if you gain a little weight, you can change it, and if you lose a little weight, you can change it back again. Okay? The next thing that I usually look at when we're looking at chairs is the back height. A general rule of thumb is the higher injury of the quad or the person, the higher the back of the chair. And that's only roughly true, I should say, because you could have a high injury if you're trying to push. You don't want to get so high that you get above the scapulas, and then the chair, the back of the chair, pushes the person forward. So if your back and the scapulas can come above the back of the chair, right in this area, you'll probably feel fairly comfortable and have the flexibility and mobility to lean back as well as forward with ease. But the height back, you have to have some height back in order to push the chair. Otherwise, you're just going to be falling over backwards. So too high, you may feel like you're falling forward all the time. And if it's too low, you'll probably feel like you're going to be falling backwards as you push. The next part that we'll consider is the dump of the chair. And this chair, which you can see if I hold the frame flat to the floor, has a lot of seat dump. And the dump is just the angle of this top rail in comparison to the floor. So the more angle to the back, the more dump the chair is said to have. This chair I use for playing tennis, and it has a lot of dump. And what dump basically does is it sits you in the chair and allows you to keep your body at a 90-degree angle while leaning you backwards a little bit to give you some stability. And some people like more dump, some people like the chair fairly flat. The more dump you have on some chairs, the faster you can push it, because the more area of the wheel you're able to push. So it's sort of like changing gears on a car. If you lower yourself into the chair, the more wheel you can push, and the further you can push with each stroke. But, you know, if you get too low, then the wheels become up under your armpits, then you're not able to wheel at all correctly. So there's a little area, a fine area there where it will feel comfortable, and then where it's not comfortable. And it depends on what you're doing. For playing tennis, you want to be fast. And for wheeling up hills or wheeling in rough terrain, you don't really want to be fast. You want to be strong. So you want to have a slower chair with more power than a fast chair with less power. Seat depth is the next piece of the chair that we'll look at. The general rule of thumb is you want the seat to be long enough to support your legs, yet short enough to get your hands behind your knees. And there are a few things you can do to cheat with seat depth, which is basically changing your cushion, going with a little bit longer cushion or a little bit shorter cushion. But the general rule of thumb is don't go so long that the chair is hard to turn around and has a long swing whenever you're turning, and not too short that you can't sit in it comfortably without your legs flopping around. And that's pretty much all there is to really the seat length of a chair. Okay. In this section, we're just going to look briefly at cushions. Cushions are extremely important, and there are so many choices and seating systems out there that a whole video could be made just on cushions and seating systems. Basically, what I want to emphasize is the importance of having any kind of a good cushion under you. One, to avoid skin breakdown, and two, to avoid your legs from flopping around on the hard seat of a chair. So the cushion does several things. One, it supports your body. Two, it keeps you from getting skin breakdowns. And beyond that, it sits you in the chair in a certain position, which determines your footboard height. So one little trick is generally, instead of changing the footboard height with each patient that comes along, if you have a tall patient, I generally just use a tall cushion and get them set up without having to change all the nuts and bolts to lower and raise the footboards at each chair that they're trying. So it takes a lot of fiddling around to find the right cushion and then the right seating height, which determines the height back and the footboard height. So when you start changing one component, the whole chair really changes. So finding the right cushion is a matter of comfort, and then the length of the person's legs and the height of their back also start playing a part in the cushion. So to keep it simple, use a good cushion. If you save one skin breakdown, it's worth thousands of dollars right there. The height of the cushion will also determine how much of a stroke you can have. Just like seat dump, if you lower your body into the chair, the height of the cushion will raise your body out of the chair. So a high cushion will shorten your stroke and make the chair more tippy as well. So when you have a high cushion, you're going to have a shorter stroke, which will be like having a car with a first gear, and a shorter cushion can put you lower into the chair and give you a longer stroke, which would be like being in second gear or third gear. So there are a lot of things to consider when you choose a cushion, and that determines, the cushion determines how much you set the chair up and for what purposes. Now you can raise and lower the axles of the chair, and why don't I just show you on this chair here. This plate, the axle plate on the chair, has basically 4 bolts on it, and there are holes underneath here. This one's at the top, so you can take and lower these by putting them down and lower this by 1 inch, which will effectively raise your seat up, take some of the dump out. So if you have a tall cushion, you may want to raise your axle plates all the way to the top. If you have a low cushion, you may want to put your axle plate at the bottom, depending on your body height and all of those things. So these things, the chairs are very adjustable, and get the right cushion, and you'll be in good stead to find out where you want to set the rest of the chair up. All right, you can adjust the rear wheel's position simply by loosening this bolt and sliding the wheel forward or backwards on the axle plate. Now what this will do is change the center of balance on the chair and how much of a stroke you get. I generally move it fairly far forwards, as far forward as is comfortable without pulling too many wheelies every time you go to take a push. And what you'll find is the better your balance is, the further forward you can get away with moving that wheel forward. But that also changes, in effect, the gear ratio of this wheelchair. Even though there are no gears involved, you can get a longer stroke and go faster with this wheel more further forward and pull wheelies easier. Now, it sounds like you're gaining all the way around, but you're losing hill climbing ability and you're losing curb jumping ability. The shorter your chair becomes, the shorter the curb you can jump. So nothing is gained, it's just a trade-off one way or the other. When it comes to choosing brakes, you have some limited choices. There are basically 3 types of brakes on the market today. There's a push brake, which locks by pushing it forward. There's a pull brake, which locks by pulling it backwards. And there are scissor brakes, which lock by sliding a scissor type apparatus. This is a scissor brake and can fit underneath the chair, so you can fold it completely out of the way without running your fingers through the brakes. The scissor brakes are very good for sports, but they're particularly awkward to use in everyday application. The push brakes are handy for a lot of quadriplegics who have any little bit of triceps or even shoulder muscles that can push forward and put a lever on it. And the pull brakes actually work good for some quadriplegics who have no triceps and want to be able to pull their brakes on. So you have limited choices as to which brakes are out there. And once you find out which setup works for you, you can certainly order that type of brake easy enough when you get your wheelchair. One little trick I wanted to show you, in the rehab center we're forever losing brake extensions, and it just becomes a pain to try ordering them. Simple thing to do is just run over to the store, any hardware store, and buy some 1/2-inch copper tubing. Cut it any length you want. You can make this is just a little 6-inch piece I cut off. And what you do is just get a 6-inch piece, get a cap, and you can just stick that on there. That fits right on to give you so that the patient won't hurt their hands. And this can be slipped right over the brake extension. And now you have a perfectly functional brake extension and a cheap fix for a common problem of losing your brake extensions. Once you've determined the seat dump on the chair and have moved the axle plate to wherever it's going to be staying, then you need to adjust your caster angle. And that is done with 2 bolts on most of these chairs. And simply, these are eccentric bolts, and you can turn the caster to make it 90 degrees to the floor. You want the caster to be straight up and down so that it's not trying to sway the chair one way or the other when you're moving it forward or backwards. So you really need to try to get this spindle of the caster fork to be 90 degrees to the floor. And once you determine the seat dump and the seat height and all, then you can determine where you set the caster angle. Let's spend a moment and just take a little bit of time and look at camber on a wheelchair and what you have it for and how do you go about getting some. Camber is basically used to help the chair to turn. It's the same principle as a bicycle wheel. When you slant your bicycle on an angle, your bicycle will turn the corner. If the chair is made to do a lot of cornering, you want a lot of camber. And this chair over here, my tennis chair, has, you can see a fair amount of camber on it. It doesn't have the right tires on it right now because they're off on my bike. But if you look down in here where the axle plate mounts against the frame, you can see that there's spacers placed in there. And these spacers kick the bottom of the plate out, and it gives the wheel more camber, which basically helps the chair to turn. And also it keeps the forces of the wheel in line with the spokes. So when a lot of weight goes on this wheel, it's made to carry that weight instead of having it straight up and bending the wheel over. All right. On my everyday chair, I only have one washer in between the plate and that gives you about 3 degrees. So for every washer you put in there, you gain about 3 degrees of camber. And 3 to 6 is the normal amount of camber you want to put on a chair. And basically, you're trying to keep the chair narrow for going through doors. You're not trying to have a very hard turning chair. And that's all there is to camber. Camber is simply a way to stabilize the chair and give you a little bit of ability to corner better. The other thing that I like about camber, when you consider pushing, if your wheel is perpendicular to the ground, when you push, you have to push perpendicular to the ground, which is not quite ergonomically as nice as you'd like it to be. If you have camber, then when you're pushing down, your down force is actually giving you traction or friction on the wheel. So camber is very handy as far as pushing on a wheel and getting more friction or traction on the tire for your grip. And so it's another little handy thing about camber. But again, any extreme is not the best thing to have. If you get too extreme, it becomes non-functional as far as going through doors. Let's take a look at the front end of the wheelchair. When we consider the front end, we want to look at the forks, the type of tire that you're going to use, and how it will be mounted. When you consider the front wheels, you have a variety of, from the microcaster, 4-inch, 5-inch, all the way up to 8-inch wheels. And depending on what you're going to be using the wheel for will depend on what you... This is my tennis chair, and I always have micro casters on it because they turn very easily on a smooth surface. And I'm not really expecting to run into any bumps or things like that on a tennis court. So they turn very quickly, and that's what they work well as the micro wheel. When you consider the chair, the fork, you want to look at the sweep of it. And the sweep of a wheel is the circle that it turns as it spins around. And if you have too much sweep, you can see that this chair just clears the front end. And that's about as tight as you'd want to get it. So this fork works well with this chair. And the other thing that you want to consider when setting up the front end is to get this perpendicular to the floor. And you do that simply by adjusting these bolts. These are eccentric cam bolts that can move and tilt this front end forward and backwards. And when you get it going to the floor, you can see that this fork, the fork stem, is 90 degrees to the floor. And that's really what you want, so that it will turn and swivel very easily in any direction. And doesn't have to lift the front end up or down. On this front end, this is my everyday chair. You have a different type of fork. We have a 1.5 inch extended bolt for the fork stem. And what we've done here is taking the wheel out of this hole. The axle is now mounted up in this other taller hole. And what this does is it shortens the sweep of the wheel, but it allows it to clear the foot plates while the fork stem is still in front of the down tube. And this is a very important little piece that most people don't pay much attention to. When you have this chair sitting in the upright position, okay, you can see that this fork is located in front of the down tube. So when you put pressure on this down tube, there's no way to lift the back wheels off the ground. The weight is carried behind the fork stems. This chair that I'm sitting in, my brand new chair, which I recently got, the front end is incorrect. And the distributor was supposed to bring it with the 1.5 inch fork extender and the same fork. It's the same, this piece of the fork, the blade, is the same as the other chair you just looked at, but there's no spacer in here, and the wheel is mounted back here for a further sweep. Well, the problem with this chair was it was hitting my heel loops, and so the distributor thought, well, I'll just put the left side on the right side and correct the problem, which is not what we agreed to when we bought this chair. But the problem with this chair is anytime you put weight on it, the whole chair wants to stand up on its nose. And if you're transferring and you're putting weight on a chair, the back wheels are all that holds you stationary in place because they're the only things that lock. So the problem with this chair, every time you transfer, your weight comes off the back end and the chair stands on its nose. All right, horrible thing to have when you're rolling along on rough terrain like the grass. Already just playing bocce the other day, this chair almost dumped me out 2 times on a flat bocce grass court. So when you're considering your front ends, try to get them dialed in right, and if you can, keep the fork in front of the down tube, not behind it, as this situation is. This creates a dangerous situation, and it's something that I'll have to change. When it comes time to choosing hand rims, you have 3 basic choices. There's the hand rim with projections, and these are, of course, for the quadriplegics. This is a plastic-coated projection hand rim, which gives you kind of an intermediate between just projections and the plastic hand rim. The plastic hand rims are high friction, and they all have their benefits, and then there's the aluminum, simple, plain coated aluminum hand rim. Each one has their place. Basically, higher quadriplegic, quadriplegic, with some lower functioning like a C6, C7 area, and paraplegic. Basic rule of thumb. Nice and light, a little bit heavier, a little bit more awkward, but easier to push without having to strain yourself to get a grip. So all three of these hand rims have their places. And when it comes to the projection hand rims, there are 8, 10, and 12 lug hand rims. And I would strongly suggest that you try even a 12 if you can find them. I think it just makes the placement of your hand a little bit easier. The spaces are a little bit shorter, so if you miss, you're not missing for such a long distance. One of the good points about this hand rim is it has plastic coating on it. You can push it just about anywhere and get some high friction. One of the bad things about it, though, is that these projections are fairly squared off, and if you push on these for a while, they'll hurt your hands. So you may want to consider something with the rubber-coated ones like we used in the film earlier today. When it comes time to choosing tires for your wheelchair, you have a large variety of tires to choose from. The first one I'll talk about is the high-pressure, basically 1-inch wide, narrow tire. This tire, very good for indoor use, sports, as far as road racing or tennis, basketball, rugby, that type of sport. It's a more efficient tire. It rolls much better than the other ones. The downside of this tire is it's lousy on the grass or any soft surfaces. The intermediate tire, which is 1 3/8 inches in general, is sort of a compromise between the high pressure and the low off-road tire. The low off-road tire has its place in soft soils, sand, outdoor on the grass. Very good. The downside to this tire is that it's a very heavy tire, and the more rubber that you use or flex on the road, the more energy it takes or loses. So a big tire, good for the soft area or rough terrain. Climbing curbs, it definitely has an advantage. On the downside, uses more energy for everyday rolling around uses. Intermediate tire sort of does both worlds fairly well, and the high pressure tire, very good indoors, but loses it on the soft surfaces. So those are your three basic choices. When it comes time to pick wheels, you only have about two major choices. One is a spoked wheel, which is fairly light and relatively durable thing. And then you have the mag wheel, which is a bit heavier, but extremely rugged, never rust. So if you want to be off rolling in the beach in salt water, you may want to consider getting the plastic lug type, or if you're in an extremely heavy-duty situation and not concerned about weight. Otherwise, I would just go with a straight spoked wheel and go with that. And there are a number of other options you can do when choosing tires. There are solid inserts to keep from having air in the tires, and different types of tires, but there's no time to consider all of those choices here in this limited video. This is just to give you a general idea of some of the options that you'll have and some of the things you can do to set the chair up while you're trying to find out which chair is going to work best for you. Well, that about covers it for wheelchair mobility. At least you have the basics to begin with. If you need to, you can get a copy of the book, Wheelchair Mobility, or you can go on the website, wheelchairmobility.org, and you can get in touch with me if you need anything further. I'd like to take a moment just to say thank you to Manchester Community College. College so accessible, it was hard to find doors and things to open that were related to what most doors are like. I'd also like to thank John Murray for producing this whole film, and also Meg Neiman, the occupational therapist who coordinated and set up the entire thing. And well, that's it. God bless.